The guard's flashlight cut through the darkness of the royal stables. It was past midnight, and something wasn't right. The horses were restless, shifting in their stalls, breathing heavy into the cold autumn air. Thomas had worked palace security for 11 years, and he knew when something was wrong. Then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Quiet sobbing, muffled, coming from the far end of the stable. His hand moved to his radio, but he hesitated. Protocol said to report everything, but something in that sound made him pause. It wasn't a threat. It was pain. Thomas moved slowly between the stalls, his boots silent on the hay-covered floor. The crying grew louder. And then he saw him. Prince Louis, 15 years old, heir to the throne. Sitting in the corner of an empty stall, knees pulled to his chest, face buried in his arms. His shoulders shook with each sob. The guard froze. He'd seen the prince before, of course. Always at a distance. Always surrounded by tutors, advisors, photographers, always smiling that perfect royal smile. But this was different. This was a boy, alone and broken, hiding among the horses. Thomas cleared his throat softly. The prince's head snapped up. His eyes were red and swollen. Fear flashed across his face. "Your Highness," Thomas said gently, lowering his flashlight. "Are you all right?" Louis scrambled to his feet, wiping his face with his sleeve. Even in crisis, even sobbing in a stable at midnight, he tried to compose himself. That's what they'd taught him. Never show weakness. Never let them see you break. "I'm fine," Louis said, but his voice cracked. "Please don't tell anyone I'm here. Before you continue watching, hit that subscribe button. Stories like this deserve to be shared, and you won't want to miss what happens next." Thomas should have called it in immediately. A member of the royal family, missing from the palace, found alone in the middle of the night. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the desperation in the boy's eyes. Maybe it was the memory of his own son, the same age, who sometimes needed space to breathe. "What happened?" Thomas asked, keeping his distance, keeping his voice low. Louis shook his head. His jaw clenched. For a moment, Thomas thought he wouldn't answer. Then quietly, almost a whisper, "I don't want to see her." "Who?" "My mother." The words came out like broken glass. "The Queen?" Thomas felt his stomach drop. Whatever this was, it was bigger than a teenage argument. The prince's hands were trembling. His breathing was sharp and uneven. One of the horses, a gray mare named Sterling, pushed her nose over the stall door toward Louis. The prince reached up instinctively, placing his hand on her muzzle. The touch seemed to calm him just a little. "How long have you been out here?" Thomas asked. I don't know. A few hours, maybe." Louis kept his eyes on the horse. "They're looking for me, aren't they?" "I imagine so, yes." The prince nodded slowly. "Let them look." Thomas stepped closer, careful not to crowd him. "Your Highness, I need to understand what's going on." "If you're in danger, I'm not in danger," Louis interrupted, his voice harder now. "I just needed to disappear for a while." "Is that so terrible? To want to be invisible?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Thomas looked at this boy, this future king, hiding in the stables like a criminal. And he realized that whatever had driven him here, it wasn't something small. "What did she do?" Thomas asked quietly. Louis's hand stopped moving on the horse's muzzle. His eyes filled with tears again. "She made a decision," he said. "About my life. About my future. And she didn't even ask me." The guard waited. The horses breathed. And somewhere in the distance, voices echoed across the palace grounds. They were getting closer. Asterisk, the voices were getting closer. Flashlight beams swept across the courtyard outside. Thomas could hear the urgency in their shouts. The whole palace was searching for the missing prince. "They'll find you soon," Thomas said. "You know that," Louis nodded, but he didn't move. His hand stayed on Sterling's muzzle, drawing comfort from the animal's warmth. "Let me tell you something," he said quietly. "Do you know what it's like to have your entire life planned out before you're even old enough to understand what life means?" Thomas didn't answer. He just listened. "I'm 15 years old," Louis continued. I've never chosen anything. Not my school, not my friends, not what I study or where I go or who I'm allowed to talk to. Everything is decided for me. Everything is for the crown, for the kingdom, for the legacy. His voice grew stronger, anger mixing with the pain. And today she told me I'm engaged. Engaged. To Princess Catherine of Denmark. I've met her twice. Twice. We barely spoke. And now she's going to be my wife. Thomas felt his chest tighten. An arranged marriage. In this day and age, he'd heard rumors that some royal families still practice this tradition, but hearing it from the prince himself made it real. Thomas asked. The announcement is tomorrow. The wedding is planned for my 18th birthday. 3 years from now. Louis laughed bitterly. 3 years to prepare myself to marry a stranger. They think that's generous. The prince turned to face Thomas fully now. His eyes were fierce, determined. I told her no. I said I wouldn't do it. And do you know what she said? Thomas waited. She said, this isn't about what you want, Louis. This is about duty. This is about strengthening our alliance with Denmark. This is about the future of our nation. She didn't even look sad about it. She just looked disappointed that I was being difficult. The voices outside grew louder. Thomas could make out individual words now. Check the gardens again. Has anyone searched the eastern wing? Where is he? Your Highness, Thomas said carefully. I understand you're upset. But running won't change this. You're still the heir. You still have responsibilities. Louis's expression hardened. You sound just like her. I'm not trying to. I'm trying to help you think clearly. Think clearly. Louis stepped away from Sterling, his fists clenched. I've been thinking clearly for 15 years. Every decision, every action, every word I say is calculated. I'm never allowed to just feel. Never allowed to just be angry or sad or scared. I'm a prince. I have to be perfect. He moved to the stable door, looking out into the darkness. And now they want me to marry someone I don't know. Someone I don't love. Because it's good for politics. Because it's what's expected. Thomas joined him at the door. What about Princess Catherine? How does she feel about this? Louis was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe she's as trapped as I am. Maybe she's in her own stable somewhere, hiding from her own mother. The thought seemed to calm him slightly. Thomas saw an opportunity. Then maybe you should talk to her. Before you refuse, before you run, talk to her. She's a person too. Not just a political arrangement. Maybe she's just as scared as you are. Louis considered this. The anger in his eyes softened, replaced by something else. Uncertainty. Hope, maybe. You think she'd understand? I think, Thomas said slowly, that you're both young people being forced into something neither of you asked for. That's common ground. Maybe that's somewhere to start. The stable door suddenly swung open. 3 palace guards rushed in, followed by an advisor Thomas recognized. Relief and frustration crossed their faces when they saw the prince.
How yes?
The advisor gasped. Thank God, your mother has been beside herself. Louis straightened immediately. The vulnerable boy disappeared. The prince returned. Shoulders back, chin up, emotions locked away. I apologize for the concern, Louis said, his voice steady now. I needed some air. I lost track of time. The advisor's eyes narrowed. He knew there was more to this, but protocol dictated acceptance. Of course, Your Highness. If you'll come with us, the Queen wishes to speak with you. Louis's jaw tightened, but he nodded. He turned to Thomas, and for just a second, the mask slipped. Thank you, he said quietly. As they led him away, Thomas stood alone in the stable. Sterling nudged his shoulder as if asking where the sad boy had gone. Asterisk, the Queen's private study was suffocating. Louis stood before her desk, hands clasped behind his back, eyes forward. The formal posture he'd been taught since childhood. Show no weakness. Give nothing away. Queen Eleanor sat in silence, studying her son. She was 52, elegant, powerful, a woman who had ruled for 23 years with strength and precision. A woman who showed no emotion, even now. Explain yourself, she said finally. Went for a walk. I lost track of time. Don't lie to me, Louis. The prince's jaw clenched. I needed space to think about. About the decision you made without consulting me? The queen leaned back in her chair. You mean your engagement, yes? A long silence stretched between them. Outside the window, dawn was beginning to break. Louis had been missing for over 4 hours. For hours that had turned the palace upside down. You're 15, the queen said. You're not expected to understand the complexities of royal duty yet. I understand perfectly well, Louis replied, his voice tight. You're marrying me off to strengthen a political alliance. I'm a bargaining chip. You're the future king. Thing, apparently. Eleanor stood, moving to the window. For a moment, just a moment, Louis thought he saw something in her posture. Weariness, maybe? Regret? But when she turned back, her face was stone. When I was 17, she said quietly, my parents arranged my marriage to your father. We had met 3 times. I didn't love him. I barely knew him. Louis felt something shift in his chest. She'd never spoken about this before. But I married him anyway. Because it was my duty. Because our families needed the alliance. Because that's what being royal means. She moved closer to Louis, and over time, we built something. Not love, perhaps. Not at first. But respect. Partnership. Understanding. Father's been dead for 8 years, Louis said softly. Did you ever love him? The question hung in the air. Eleanor's expression flickered, just for a second. I honored him. I stood beside him. I built a kingdom with him, and when he died, I grieved him. She paused. Love comes in many forms, Louis. Some are simply quieter than others. That's not enough for me, Louis said. I want more than that. Then you're naive. The word stung. Louis felt anger rising again. Maybe I am. But at least I'm honest about what I want. At least I'm not pretending that sacrificing happiness is noble. Happiness. Eleanor's voice sharpened. You speak of happiness as if it's a right. It's a luxury, Louis. One that people in our position rarely afford. Then maybe I don't want this position. The words escaped before he could stop them. The room went deadly silent. Eleanor stared at her son as if he'd struck her. What did you say? Louis met her eyes. His heart was pounding, but he didn't back down. I said, maybe I don't want to be king. Maybe I want a different life. A normal life. There is no different life. You were born into this. You can't simply walk away because it's difficult. You mean I'm trapped? You mean you have a responsibility? To this family. To this nation. 2 centuries of tradition. Louis shook his head slowly. And what about responsibility to myself? To my own life. My own future? Eleanor moved to her desk, placing her hands flat on the surface. When she spoke again, her voice was ice. The engagement will be announced tomorrow at 10 o'clock. You will stand beside me. You will smile. You will show the nation that you are ready to lead. And you will accept Princess Catherine with grace and dignity. And if I refuse, you won't. Mother, this conversation is over, Louis. She looked at him with eyes that held no warmth. Go to your room. Get some rest. Tomorrow is an important day, Louis wanted to scream. He wanted to argue. He wanted to make her understand, but he could see it in her face. She was done listening. Maybe she'd never really listened at all. He turned toward the door. His hand on the handle, he stopped. The guard who found me, he said without turning around. Thomas, don't punish him. He was just doing his job. I have no intention of punishing him, Eleanor replied. Unlike you, he understands duty. Louis left without another word. The door closed softly behind him. Eleanor stood alone in her study as the sun rose over the kingdom. She moved to the window, watching the light spread across the grounds. Her hand trembled slightly. She pressed it against the glass until it stopped. Then she straightened her shoulders and became the queen again. Louis didn't sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows change as morning arrived. His room was enormous, It's filled with expensive furniture and priceless art. A golden cage. At 8 o'clock, his personal assistant knocked. "Your Highness, we need to begin preparations." The announcement was in 2 hours. 2 hours until his life became public property. 2 hours until the world knew he belonged to someone he'd barely met. Louis, dressed in the formal suit they'd laid out for him. Navy blue, perfectly tailored. He looked in the mirror and barely recognized himself. He looked older, harder, like someone pretending to be a prince. The makeup artist arrived to hide the exhaustion in his face. The hairstylist fixed every strand into place. By 9:30, Prince Louis looked perfect. Absolutely perfect. Completely empty. His mother was already in the grand hall when he arrived. She wore a deep emerald gown, her crown catching the light from the massive chandeliers. She looked every inch the queen. She didn't smile when she saw him. "Stand here," she said, indicating a spot beside her. "When they bring Catherine in, you'll greet her warmly. You'll take her hand." "You'll look happy, of course," Louis said, his voice hollow. "Louis," his mother's voice softened just slightly. "This gets easier. I promise you that." He didn't respond. What was there to say? At exactly 10 o'clock, the doors opened. The royal court filed in, dressed in their finest. Advisors, nobles, distant relatives, all here to witness the announcement. All here to watch him seal his fate. And then she entered. Princess Catherine of Denmark. Louis had prepared himself to feel nothing, to look at her and see only the cage closing, but something unexpected happened. She was beautiful. Yes. Blonde hair, blue eyes, the kind of beauty that belonged on paintings. But that wasn't what caught his attention. It was her eyes. They were terrified. She walked toward them with perfect posture, perfect grace, but her hands trembled slightly at her sides. Her smile was practiced, forced, and when her eyes met Louis's, he saw the same trapped animal he'd seen in his own reflection. She was just as scared as he was. The queen stepped forward, her voice carrying across the hall. "Distinguished guests, it is my great honor to announce the engagement of Crown Prince Louis to Princess Catherine of Denmark. This union will strengthen the bond between our nations and secure a prosperous future for both kingdoms." Applause filled the room. Cameras flashed. Louis barely heard any of it. He was looking at Catherine, and she was looking back at him. In that moment, something passed between them. Understanding, maybe. Recognition. Thomas's words echoed in his mind. "Maybe she's just as scared as you are." The queen gestured for them to come together. Louis stepped forward. Catherine did the same. When they stood face to face, Louis extended his hand as instructed. Catherine placed her hand in his. Her fingers were ice cold. "Smile," his mother whispered. They smiled. The cameras captured the moment. The future king and his bride-to-be looking perfect together. Looking happy, looking like everything a royal engagement should be. But Louis felt Catherine's hand trembling in his, and he squeezed it gently. Not romantically, not lovingly, but in solidarity. In acknowledgement, her eyes widened slightly. She squeezed back. The ceremony continued. Speeches were made. Toasts were raised. Catherine was led away by her own attendants, and Louis was surrounded by well-wishers. Everyone wanted to congratulate him. Everyone wanted to tell him how lucky he was. He endured it with practiced grace. But inside, something had shifted. Catherine wasn't his enemy. She wasn't the person who'd stolen his freedom. She was another prisoner in the same cage. That evening, after the formal dinner, after the endless photographs, after everyone had finally left him alone, Louis returned to his room to find a note slipped under his door. The handwriting was elegant, careful. It read, "Meet me in the rose garden at midnight. We need to talk." C. Louis stared at the note for a long time. He should ignore it. He should follow the rules, stay in his room, accept his fate quietly. That's what was expected of him. But he'd spent his whole life doing what was expected. And where had it gotten him? At 11:50, Louis slipped out of his room. The palace was quiet, most of the staff already asleep. He moved through the shadows, using passages he'd memorized as a child when he'd played hide-seek with his younger sister. The rose garden was bathed in moonlight, and there, standing among the flowers, was Catherine. She'd changed out of her formal gown into something simpler. She looked younger now, more real. "You came," she said softly. "You asked." She smiled, but it was sad. "I wasn't sure you would. I thought maybe you hated me." "I don't hate you," Louis said, moving closer. "I don't even know you." "Exactly." Catherine wrapped her arms around herself. "They're making us marry and we're strangers." Asterisk, they stood in silence for a moment, two strangers bound by a decision neither had made. The roses bloomed around them, indifferent to their struggle. "When did they tell you?" Louis asked. 3 weeks ago, Catherine replied. "My mother sat me down and explained that I'd be marrying the Crown Prince of England. She said it like she was telling me about the weather. Very matter of fact. Very final. Did you argue?" Catherine laughed quietly. "I cried for 2 days. Then I tried reasoning with her. Then I refused to eat. Then I threatened to run away." She looked at Louis. Now nothing worked. She just kept saying the same thing. Duty. Responsibility. The good of the kingdom. My mother said the same thing. Of course she did. They probably rehearsed it together. Catherine moved to sit on a stone bench. "The worst part is, I understand the logic. I really do. Our marriage makes sense politically. It strengthens both our nations. It secures trade agreements and military alliances. On paper, it's perfect. But we're not paper," Louis said, sitting beside her. "No, we're not." Catherine turned to face him fully. "Louis, can I be honest with you? Please. Asterisk, I don't want this either. But I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks and I can't see a way out. They're not going to change their minds. Our families have already made arrangements. The contracts are probably already signed." Louis felt his chest tighten. "So what do we do?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady but sad. "We have 2 choices. We can fight this and make ourselves miserable trying to escape something that's inevitable. Or we can accept it and try to make the best of an impossible situation." "The best of it," Louis repeated. "You mean pretend we're happy?" "No, I mean actually try to build something real." She reached out and took his hand. Not because she was supposed to, but because she chose to. "Louis, we're stuck with each other. That's the truth. But maybe being stuck doesn't have to mean being miserable." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we become friends. Real friends. We have 3 years before the wedding. 3 years to actually get to know each other. To talk. To be honest. To stop being strangers." Louis looked down at their joined hands. "And if we still don't love each other in 3 years, then at least we'll respect each other. At least we'll understand each other. That's more than most arranged marriages get." Catherine's eyes were earnest, almost pleading. "I know it's not the fairy tale either of us wanted, but maybe we can make it something bearable. Something that doesn't destroy us both." Louis thought about his mother's words. About how she'd married his father without love. How they'd built something over time. Was that enough? Could it be enough? "Tell me something real about yourself," Louis said suddenly. "Something no one else knows." Catherine blinked, surprised. Then a small smile crossed her face. "I hate being a princess. I hate the dresses and the etiquette and the constant scrutiny. If I could be anything else, I'd be a veterinarian. I'd work with animals all day and never have to smile for a camera again." Louis laughed, genuinely laughed, for the first time in days. "I hide in the stables when I need to think. The horses don't care that I'm a prince. They just care if I brought them carrots." "See?" Catherine said. "We already have something in common." They talked until the sky began to lighten. Catherine told him about her younger brother who had special needs, who she fiercely protected from the harsh royal spotlight. Louis told her about his sister Emma, who was 12, and thought being royal was the coolest thing in the world because she didn't understand the cost yet. Catherine confessed she was terrified of public speaking, even though she'd been trained her whole life. Louis admitted he sometimes lay awake at night wondering if he'd be a terrible king because he cared too much about being happy. As dawn broke, They realized they'd spent 6 hours talking. 6 hours of honesty. 6 hours of being real with someone who understood. "We should go back," Catherine said reluctantly. "Before someone notices we're gone." Louis stood, helping her up. "Catherine, yes, thank you. For the note. For being honest." She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Thank you for coming. I thought I'd have to face this alone." "You're not alone," Louis said. And he meant it. "We're in this together now." They walked back to the palace separately, careful not to be seen. But something had changed. The cage was still there. The arrangement was still forced. But maybe, just maybe, they'd found a way to survive it together. When Louis finally fell asleep that morning, he dreamed of roses and honest conversations and a girl with scared eyes who'd chosen to be brave. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was hope. And for the first time since his mother's announcement, hope felt like enough. 3 years passed. Not quickly, but they passed. Louis and Catherine wrote letters. Real letters, not the formal correspondence their families encouraged. She told him about her struggles with anxiety before public events. He told her about the pressure to be perfect, to never make mistakes. They shared fears and frustrations and small moments of joy. They met 4 times a year for official visits. At first, these meetings were awkward, performed for cameras and diplomats. But slowly, something genuine grew between them. They developed inside jokes. They learned each other's tells when they were uncomfortable or upset. They became each other's safe place in a world that demanded everything. Catherine learned that Louis disappeared to the stables when he was overwhelmed. Louis learned that Catherine hummed quietly to herself when she was anxious. They protected these truths about each other, keeping them private even from their families. On Louis's 18th birthday, the wedding preparations began in earnest. The guest list reached 5,000 people. The ceremony would be broadcast in 43 countries. Every detail was scrutinized, planned, perfected the night before the wedding. Louis found himself back in the stables. Sterling was older now, moving slower, but she still remembered him. He pressed his forehead against her neck and breathed in the familiar smell of hay and horse and safety. Couldn't sleep either? Louis turned. Catherine stood in the doorway, wearing a simple nightgown and robe. Her hair was down, no crown, no jewelry. "Just her. I thought I might find you here," she said, moving to join him. "Remember when you told me about this place? About how the guard found you hiding here?" "Thomas," Louis said. "He's retired now. But he still writes to me sometimes. Checking in." Catherine reached up to stroke Sterling's nose. "Were you scared that night? When they found you?" "Terrified. I thought my life was over." Louis looked at her. "I didn't know you yet. Would it have changed anything? If you'd known?" "Yes," Louis said honestly. "I think it would have changed everything." They stood together in the quiet stable. Tomorrow, they would be married. Tomorrow, their lives would be bound forever in front of the entire world. But tonight, they were just 2 people who'd learned to understand each other. "Louis," Catherine said softly, "I need to tell you something." His heart quickened. "What is it?" "I'm still scared. About tomorrow. About being your wife. About being queen someday." She turned to face him fully. "But I'm not scared of you anymore. Somewhere along the way, you became my friend. My real friend, and that's more than I ever hoped for." Louis felt something warm spread through his chest. "You became my friend too." "My best friend, actually. Is that enough?" Catherine asked. "For a marriage?" Louis thought about his mother's words 3 years ago. About duty and sacrifice and quiet love. He thought about the conversations he'd had with Catherine. The letters? The honest moments. The way she made him laugh when everything felt too heavy. "I don't know if it's love yet," Louis said carefully, "but I care about you. I respect you. I want you to be happy. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make this work for both of us." Catherine's eyes glistened. "That's more than most people get in arranged marriages." "Then maybe we're lucky." She laughed through tears. "Lucky. What a strange way to describe this." Louis reached out and took her hand. Not for the cameras. Not for duty. But because he wanted to. Catherine, I can't promise you passion. I can't promise you the fairy tale. But I promise you partnership. I promise you honesty. I promise you that I'll never stop trying to make you happy. I promise you the same, Catherine said. We'll figure this out together. They stayed in the stables until dawn, just like that first night in the rose garden, talking about their fears, their hopes, the life they would build together. It wasn't the marriage either of them had dreamed of as children, but it was real. It was honest, and it was theirs. The wedding was everything the world expected. Magnificent. Perfect. The ceremony was flawless. Louis and Catherine spoke their vows in front of 5,000 guests and millions watching on television. They looked happy. They looked like they belonged together. And the truth was, somewhere along the way, they had started to belong together. Not through love at first sight, not through romance or fairy tales, but through choosing each other day after day, letter after letter, conversation after conversation. When Louis kissed Catherine at the altar, it wasn't their first kiss. They'd shared one 2 months earlier in the palace library, when they'd both reached for the same book and ended up laughing so hard they could barely breathe. That kiss had been tentative, curious, uncertain, but it had been real. This kiss, the official one, the public one, was different. It was a promise, a commitment, a choice they were making together. Years later, when people asked Crown Prince Louis about his arranged marriage, he would think about that night in the stables, about a guard named Thomas who'd shown him kindness, about a girl who'd been just as scared as he was, about learning that love didn't always arrive like lightning. Sometimes it grew slowly, built on foundation of friendship and respect and choosing each other every single day. He would smile and say, "It started with us both being trapped. But we chose to be trapped together. And that made all the difference." Queen Eleanor watched her son's wedding from her seat in the cathedral. She saw the way Louis looked at Catherine, the way they held hands like they actually wanted to. And for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to feel something she rarely permitted: relief, and perhaps, just perhaps, pride. Her son had learned what she'd tried to teach him all along, that duty and happiness weren't always opposites, that sometimes the life you're given becomes the life you choose. That love could grow even in the most impossible circumstances. As the newlyweds walked down the aisle together, Louis caught sight of Thomas in the crowd. The retired guard smiled and nodded. Louis smiled back. 3 years ago, he'd been a boy hiding in the stables, convinced his life was over. Today, he was a man walking into a future he'd learned to embrace. Not because it was easy, not because it was what he'd wanted, but because he'd found someone to walk through it with him. And in the end, that was enough.